Edgy Lee and Don Brown explore the history of African Americans in Hawaii in Exit to Paradise.
2 years before I moved to Hawaii in 1988, I was writing for a couple of magazines on the mainland, one in San Francisco, the other in Washington, D.C. I was constantly pitching story ideas, and the answer was usually no. But there was one I really wanted to do, and that was the story of the black whalers in the Pacific. To do the research, I went to old whaling ports like New Bedford, Nantucket, Honolulu, Lahaina, and discovered by pure accident of history, black Americans had started coming to Hawaii as early as 1796. First, Nantucket was not only a major whaling center, but the refuge of Quakers who were staunch abolitionists. It became a safe haven for free blacks who often signed on as hands on whaling vessels that traveled the globe. In fact, men like Absalom Boston rose through the ranks to become the captain. Second, the whaling routes took the boats along the coast of Africa to Cape Verde, a Portuguese colony, where they took on more hands. From there, they traveled down the Brazilian banks, around Cape Horn to the Pacific, and finally to Hawaii, a major provisioning port. The temptation of Hawaii after being stuck on a cramped whaler, smelling of blubber, was too much to resist for a lot of sailors, including Cape Verdeans and black Americans, and many jumped ship, quietly intermarried, and blended in with the locals. This is where I first came across the exceptional story of Anthony Allen, a former slave from Schenectady, New York, who purchased his freedom, signed on as a whaling hand in Boston, sailed to the Pacific and Far East, and landed in Hawaii in 1810. He was there to greet the missionaries when they arrived in 1821. Years later, when I saw Edgy's film, Waikiki in the Wake of Dreams, I knew exactly who that character was.
Surprisingly, in all the research we'd done, I had never even heard this story, and then all of a sudden, there he was, Anthony Allen, on the plains of Waikiki, beloved by everyone from the Hawaiians to the missionaries, so inventive, resourceful, honest. He was just like the perfect guy. And to know that he was there, he was the first businessman. And from then on, I knew this was a history that I wanted to be a part of sharing with mainstream American audiences. And then when Don and I met, it was like click, it was natural.
The black sailors who jumped ship came with skills that were useful and valued by the native Hawaiians. Many were incorporated into King Kamehameha's inner circle as boat builders, craftsmen, cooks, and musicians, introducing new and unfamiliar rhythms. But I couldn't find any record of black women in Hawaii until I stumbled across the journals of Betsy Stockton at the Mission Houses Museum. Educated in the employ of the former president of Princeton University, she arrived in Hawaii in 1823 as a missionary and servant employed by the Reverend Charles S. Stewart.
She recognized that there was no school available for ordinary folk, that is to say what the Hawaiians would call the maka'ainana, the common people, and she took it upon herself to start a school for the people in the community in Lahaina. And it was the forerunner of a very popular and continuing school on Maui now that is called Lahaina Luna School.
The musical prowess of the black sailors was widely admired by King Kamehameha. And in 1836, 17 years after his death, a group coalesced to form the Royal Hawaiian Band, led by a man known only as Oliver.
The first band, in fact, was all blacks, and eventually, through the middle part of the century, there were many blacks and part blacks who were a part of the Royal Hawaiian Band. Of course, this is rarely ever mentioned.
It's such a unique piece of history that's been overlooked, and the fact that it's been overlooked is really quite astounding.
Another hidden part of Hawaii history is the role the Civil War played in the development of the plantation culture of the Hawaii Territory. Stripped of free labor by Mr. Lincoln, Southern planters saw the open land of Hawaii as a new frontier, and many found a willing alignment among newly land-rich missionary families.
The whole racial awareness and consciousness was changing as the planter class and the entrepreneur class grew in the islands, and as more and more control, economic control and social control, was exerted over the local residents. The configuration of control had changed from the Hawaiian people being in control of their rule to many advisors from the mainland, many of whom were Southerners and who had that Southern mentality.
In the first half of the 19th century, blacks freely intermarried with Hawaiian women and were readily accepted as part of the community. But as the missionary and Southern influences gained the upper hand after the Civil War, blacks often found it was to their advantage to hide their identities.
Our heritage and our identity became absorbed, assimilated, which for some people might think it's a good idea, but it was associated with, too often, with shame, with degradation, with negative stereotypes.
It's a prime example of stereotypes, characterizations, and assumptions that are made about people. And I see it happening with many, many different groups. But to understand, you know, this 18th century and 19th century history in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and never expect to see people of color, not these kinds of people of color, and to know that they were so interwoven in the history of Hawaii, so important in the early days. You know, this is before the turn of the century. This is long, long ago. I think that's really wonderful.
A professor of mine once told me, history is written by the victors, but the truth is not always the victor's friend. This is a chapter that's been written out of Hawaii history books, but I think it's important for two reasons. First, it's a tribute to people of color who refused to be victims in a system that had everything going against them. They saw an opportunity, seized it, and succeeded in creating a better life than they were expected to have. Second, Hawaii, the real Hawaii, has a vital lesson to teach the rest of the country and the world about tolerance, acceptance, and the real meaning of aloha.
It's a story that's long overdue, and I'd be really proud to be a part of bringing that to the American audience.
We'll be right back.